CRB looked out at the dreary landscape that zoomed past him, the car seemingly picking up even more speed than it already had once a city with grey apartment blocks and a few houses, which had definitely seen better days, came into view. He glanced over at the short man beside him. His eyes were locked on the road and his expression was set into a constant faint scowl, but one of his hands would occasionally leave the steering wheel to fidget with his suit jacket instead. CRB swore he could sometimes see his unnaturally pale irises twitch into his direction just as he was conspicuously sliding his thumb along the inside of the jacket, close to where he knew he'd concealed his gun. CRB focused back on the road of the car, pretending not to be hurt. It wasn't like he particularly trusted Jano anymore either, nor did he even really still want to work for him or be around him at all. Though, unlike him, Jano had no reason to suspect CRB would hurt him, as he never had. Perhaps Jano realized CRB's wavering interest, suspecting an opening vacuum of loyalty and trust, and thus was now gearing himself up just in case his most prized weapon suddenly turned against him. I'm not untrustworthy enough for him not to use me anymore, though, CRB thought, briefly flexing his claws. I'm still here, cleaning up his messes. You'd think people would stop slipping up so much, since they know exactly what will happen to them when they do. He used the term slipping up loosely, as in most cases he didn't even know whatever it was the person had done to earn Jano's wrath, to the extent that he wanted to use his killing machine. Jano would simply point and CRB would kill, and that's how it had been for decades. He wouldn't say he felt sorry for any of them, but in recent months he had begun to grow weary of this whole relationship. Not like Jano had ever reimbursed him for his work, except for half-hearted physical affections that were so clearly fake and cold, CRB had stopped seeking them out entirely. Maybe that was another reason Jano had become rather jumpy, because he'd been less of a lapdog. CRB narrowed his eyes slightly. He would still be one, if Jano cared at all. It was clear he didn't, though. He'd put his bullets in him too many times for anyone to still believe in that farce. The car came to an abrupt stop, flinging him forwards into the dashboard, since he never bothered with a seatbelt. He made a disgruntled noise and shot a glare at Jano, who slyly pretended not to see it. Come on then, you've got someone to kill, Jano said simply, his voice smooth and cold, devoid of any enjoyment or passion as it always was. CRB rolled his eyes and got out, slamming the door harder than necessary, and stuck his hands into the pockets of his jacket, pulled his shoulders up, and followed Jano to the house their target lived in. It had a rustic charm if one wanted to be kind about its appearance, but CRB preferred the terms falling apart and decrepit. The grass and bushes in the small front yard were all dead and curled into twisted shapes. Everything looked this way, this close to the bleach zone. The air stung in his lungs and made his eyes water, and he wondered, as he always did, how regular humans even managed to live out here. Well, this one, at least, would not manage any more after today. He slowly let his tail slither out of his back in preparation as Jano stepped up to the door and knocked on it harshly. Laszlo, come out. It'll make this whole thing much easier. You know exactly that you can't run from the consequences of your foolish actions, Jano called. His voice was filled with a sickening sweetness that was comparable to how he spoke to those idiotic tourists who would visit his golden cities, only in the end did it become cooler. CRB glanced around the yard, noticing plenty of used syringes and shattered bottles lying around, in addition to general garbage. Some of it was bagged, and some of it just freely fluttered around in the faint, suffocating breeze. Please, sir, a frightened, hoarse voice came from the inside, its owner's throat really rubbed raw by breathing the toxic air all his life. Just a little more time. I graciously gave you more, and you repaid me by spitting in my face and attempting to flee your designated area, Jano countered plainly. CRB only half listened, though he had to suppress a snort when Jano called himself gracious. He'd decidedly never been that. I know, sir, but in just 2 more days I will have the money. I'll have everything to repay you, please. I'm afraid your debt isn't the only crime you've committed anymore now. Trying to escape. To me, that doesn't sound like a good citizen who wants to settle his debt at all. Jano's face remained expressionless, despite the smooth tone of his voice, which gave the impression that the man's punishment was out of his hands. There was a small whimper coming from the inside, and a moment later, a sickeningly pale, emaciated face peeked through the dirty windows. His eyes were sunken in, and he had deep, dark circles beneath them. Half his face was slightly lopsided and infested with nasty boils. His dreadfully dull eyes widened in terror as soon as they met CRB's dark ones, and he pulled back into the hiding. No, no, sir, please. Anything but it. Please, just shoot me then. Anything. I'm afraid not, Jano replied with a careless tone. You don't deserve a quick death anymore. Jano made a motion with his hand, but for a moment CRB didn't move. It? CRB wrinkled his nose. He wasn't an it. Had they always called him that? Had he never noticed? Or had he simply not cared until now? Suddenly there was a shot in the air, and he flinched heavily, joined by a hopeful whimper from inside the house, but Jano's now irritated and decidedly suspicious gaze was fixed on CRB. Get him, Jano commanded, his tone impatient and low, placing a pronounced space between the words. CRB gave him a small scowl, but then trod forwards, his body becoming bulky as he shed off his jacket and let the spines on his back pierce through the tight, black turtleneck he wore underneath. The house's rotting wooden door was ripped out of its lock easily, and he loomed over the man inside. The rest of his body was just as skinny as his face had been, and he could see more boils on one of his arms. Laszlo shrieked in pure terror, and seemingly with the last energy his body had, bolted with CRB right on his heels. He sprinted to the back of the house into the kitchen, where he grabbed the knife and threw it at CRB, who was only a few steps behind him. He staggered slightly as it lodged itself dangerously close to his throat, blood bubbling from the wound immediately. It gave Laszlo a small window of time, and he used it to jump out of a window, funnily enough. I don't know why I wrote it like that. Anyway, hitting the concrete alley behind it with a pathetic grunt, he quickly scrambled up and kept going. CRB didn't bother to pull the knife out. A spark of adrenaline began to pump through his veins as he jumped out after him, landing on all fours, his tail lashing in the air for balance. A few pale faces peeked out in the surrounding houses, but very quickly hid again once they spotted him, as if they were worried he might decide to just rush into their flats and kill them instead. Usually, CRB enjoyed when they ran. He would properly hunt them until they physically couldn't run anymore, but today he felt himself chase his target much quicker than he normally would, leaving a small trail of blood behind him. It took less than a minute for him to leap and push the man onto the hard ground, placing himself on his back. Please, no, I don't deserve this. I just wanted to be free. Tears streamed down Laszlo's face, and CRB hesitated, his flanks quivering from breathing this disgusting air. Who wouldn't want to be free from a country such as this? He couldn't spare him, though, not like the idea even really occurred to him as a possibility, and so instead he simply leaned down to clasp his powerful jaws around his neck, his own hot blood gurgling and splattering onto the man below. The same man who whimpered and shivered with his whole body, and yet CRB swore to see a spark of relief in his eyes, as if he realized that he would receive a quick death after all. In less than a second, his sharp teeth snapped shut, crunching through Laszlo's spine as if it were a mere twig, almost severing his head from his body in one bite. His body went limp instantly. The taste of blood flooded his tongue, but it tasted foul. Most of the people's blood around here did. With a huff, CRB let go of him and spat out a thick glob of liquid onto the concrete beside him, shaking himself. What was that? Jano's voice appeared behind him, and CRB sat up with a grunt, his body slowly melting back into its regular form. I killed him, CRB responded. That's what I was supposed to do. What a pathetic display. His voice was clearly displeased, skipping over what the other had said. I could have just shot him after all then. Didn't need to waste my time dragging you all the way out here. CRB scoffed, snapping his tail through the air. That's all I am anymore, right? A waste of your time. It's beginning to seem so, yes, Jano replied coldly. You can't even do the one thing you're supposed to be good at anymore. What use are you to me as a soft nitwit? Jano drew closer. Where's that monster that mauls and tortures, huh? Don't tell me you've lost it. That would be devastating. Especially for you, I assume. I mean, why do you even still bother being around if you can't do your one job? CRB gritted his teeth and hissed, more of his blood pumping out past the knife. Are you suggesting I should stop sticking around you or around life? Whichever one suits you best. He tensed his muscles, digging his claws into the slack body beneath him and drawing more of that unhealthy, thick, goopy dark blood. Definitely the former, then. I'm out of here. I'm not taking you back anywhere, even if you weren't making a bloody mess. Don't bother showing up again unless you've decided that you do want to be useful in any way, Jano snapped, clearly not taking what CRB had said very seriously, before turning around and leaving. His steps were quick, and he could hear him fiddle with the trigger of the gun, as if he expected him to give chase and attempt to kill him. He didn't, though. Thunder rolled in the distance, and a heavy drop of rain splashed onto the ground beside him. He knew better than to stay outside around here. It would take his body even longer to shed off the poisoning and the acidic burns the rain sometimes brought along with them. He staggered to his feet and looked around, spotting a small shelter at the end of the alley. He took a step towards it, and then looked back at Laszlo's body. Another drop of rain fell down, but this time it landed on the lifeless form and sizzled faintly, the acid within digging into the already flaking and diseased skin with ease. There would probably be little left of him by the end of this. Silently, he bowed down, blood spurting out of him as he grabbed onto the collar of the man's shirt and dragged him with him, his head dangling rather precariously from the leftover tendons and flesh his teeth hadn't severed. He let him flop back down rather carelessly once he ducked under the makeshift metallic roof. He let himself fall onto the unstable bench with a sigh, watching as the color of the street turned darker, steadily being covered by the toxic rain. "What a shitty day," CRB muttered, leaning back and kicking an empty can outside. "I'm sure you would agree, right? I mean, you did just die." Almost mindlessly, he reached up, grabbed the handle of the knife and yanked it out, throwing it into the street and watching its glistening blood slowly disintegrate in the rain. "It hardly hurts anymore, you know. Cute try, though. A lot of people don't even seem to fight back at this point. I've had a few who deliberately tried to position themselves in a way that my claws would rake over their throats rather than anywhere else. Some just killed themselves before I could. Isn't that weird?" CRB chuckled faintly. Jano was displeased about it then too, though he obviously was much angrier at them than me in those cases. He sighed again. "If he likes them dying in agony so much, he should just do it himself. Or just let them live. I hope you weren't in any more agony in your daily life than what I could have done to you anyway. His whole country is a fucking torture chamber." The rain intensified, pelting everything furiously with its deadly might as if it wanted to prove his point. CRB looked down at Laszlo's body, then hooked his boot underneath him and flipped him over. His skinny limbs flapped around limply, almost falling out into the rain, and his nearly severed head lolled uncomfortably. Some more blood lazily leaked out of his neck. It smelled foul and had a chemical note to it. CRB scrunched his nose. His face was strangely peaceful. His eyes were closed, and there was a hint of a smile dancing around the corners of his mouth. Though his skin still oozed with diseased boils, and on closer inspection, he could see scars all over him, ones he assumed to be from chemical burns or similar ailments. "Maybe killing you all is a mercy," CRB said faintly, looking back out into the rain. "I know Jano won't care for any of you. He'll kill himself before long, and I'm done trying to stop him. He wouldn't do the same for me. He pretty much just said it today." The wound close to his neck had begun to heal and barely leaked any blood anymore. His lungs, however, continued to ache, and he suppressed a cough. "I don't know if he was always this way. I think it became worse. Before, I probably didn't care so much, just throwing myself at any opportunity that made me feel useful after the war for my independence ended. It's good that it ended. I'm so glad we kicked that bitch out and reestablished our independence, but..." A rare flower of deep-rooted guilt blossomed in the back of his throat. Part of me was sad when it was over. CRB felt quiet, simply watching the rain as it lit up a tiny bit, but still created a toxic curtain that made it difficult to see the buildings at the end of the street. Thunder roared in the distance occasionally, but it didn't seem to be getting any closer. He hadn't really said that line of thought out loud, and now that he had, it made him feel dirtier than ever. How could he say something like that, or think it for that matter, after everything his Perfla had gone through in the war, after everything he'd seen, after Samo? The distorted face and mutilated body of his dead first love still haunted him over and over. He swallowed hard, but it was true. He had been sad when it was over. More so, he'd been listless, directionless, helpless. Suddenly, he'd become a fully grown country, and the people looked to him for leadership. Leadership in a way he'd never had to think about before. His responsibility was no more to kill enemy soldiers, or to organize his people to kill them, or to conquer land and fight for independence. No, suddenly he was tasked with creating a governing form, restore the land, pick up the pieces, attempt to revitalize the culture and economy, enter diplomatic relations with others. He couldn't even read or write by that time. The other issue was that he'd realized that he didn't actually know the culture of his supposed people. He was born during the war, but born might be an overstatement, as he'd heard the stories of soldiers discovering him in the hollowed-out torso of his human mother. Some had called him a result of a ritual, others simply tied his gruesome origin back to his nature. So, he had no idea what life was like outside violence, not for his people, nor in general. More than once had he impulsively begun another war back then with Miriam, and even though she deserved it, it was clear that wasn't what his people needed or wanted, and so those conflicts had fizzled out quickly. CRB opened his hands and then clenched them into fists over and over. He remembered the way his people began to look at him, with doubt in their eyes, and perhaps a spark of fear, the same thing he swore to see in Janos a few times. Today, of course, his people loved him, and he loved them, though he could never quite shake the feeling that he'd stolen them from another country that was supposed to be in his place. He doubted that he'd replicated whatever their past culture was, and even though he could read now, he hadn't dared to open up or look up any sort of writing that may mention his land before his lifetime. The idea that he'd ruined these people weighed too heavily on his shoulders. I didn't ruin them though, CRB thought energetically. Sure, other countries may look down on us because we're not like them, but who cares? Who cares if no one besides like 3 of them want to be around me? His expression turned sheepish. Maybe 4. I still don't know if he actually likes me or if he's just too scared to leave. CRB's eyes drifted back to Laszlo, who had begun to somehow look even more dead than he already had. His words echoed in his mind. I just want to be free. Wasn't that what he stood and fought for originally? He was a rebel who fought against oppression, and now, all he'd done these past years was to be a scourge on those more unfortunate than he could fathom. He slinked down and sat on the ground beside the man's body. You didn't deserve this, CRB mumbled. I don't mean me killing you, not really. I still don't feel bad about it. I just feel... He trailed off, unsure what he actually did feel, and so he continued with another train of thought. You didn't deserve being born here. None of the people do. It's only getting worse. Instead of Jano taking my advice and slowing down, he just seems to be speeding up, as if he wants to prove some kind of point to me. A faint ripple of anger went through him, making the spines in his back press up against the skin, but he didn't let them break through. I didn't want to see what he was doing. Back then, I just wanted to do what I did best, and that was to kill. I could finally break away from all this country stuff and go back to being the monster I was created to be. CRB let his tail slither back out and pulled it around himself in a half circle, its rough skin and few patches of scales scraping over the ground. He blinked and looked down at the puddles. I just... he keeps saying it's the only thing I can do again and again. I want to argue with him, but I don't know what to say. Maybe it is the only thing I can do, but I don't want to do it for him anymore, I don't think. I can't look at you or anyone here and still support him. If you were my people, I'd have killed Jano the second I saw him. He pulled his knees up to his chest and hugged them, pulling his tail even closer. I can't kill him, though. If I did that, who knows what would happen to you? You might just be annexed, or once the others realize how dead and toxic your land is, you might just be left to die with nothing. And maybe I also just can't kill him for other reasons. The idea of his flesh squelching under my talons makes me sick. CRV shook his head. If he truly didn't want to work for Jano anymore, then what would he do? He didn't have any other official alliance except for Udya, and she forbade him from doing any killing or escalating the conflict, and since he was doing this for her, well, he wasn't really in a position to disagree, no matter how much his talons edged. Back then, after the war, he already had to adjust so harshly to this new life, and now he would have to do it again. He didn't kill any of his own people on principle, and he couldn't simply go into another country to do the one thing he was good at without potentially starting a whole thing, so... The only idea he had was the dawning Second Keurig War, which seemed to be unavoidable. In that one he would thrive. He would be allowed to roam through forests, decimate enemy barracks, and be united with his people again under the warrior spirit. A small thrill ran through him, and he stretched his claws until his gaze shifted back to Laszlo. CRB huffed. Maybe you were right in calling me an it. I'm barely human, if at all, that's for sure. Even monster might be a too humanized and sympathetic name for what I am, don't you think? There was, of course, no response, and despite the absence of clear remorse, there was still a small lump that formed in his throat, and he looked away. What would he do once the Second Keurig War ended too? He couldn't just keep running from one killing spree to the next. One thing he knew was that a lot of countries and people alike secretly wished for peace. Did he ever wish for that? He recalled the evenings at Jano's place, him trying to cuddle with him, to make them something to drink or go out and party, with a notable lack of violent intent. Perhaps he had wished for it a while ago, but Jano had never been up for it, and so he'd put that aside. He trailed his talon over the ground beside him. He thought he might have wished for peace too, back when he was still with Samo. He thought he even wished for the war to be over, so they could simply be together. But then he died, and nothing else but violence remained. His mind shifted to another person, his red face streaked with glowing gold flickering in front of him, and despite his inner rumbling, a faint blush pulled itself through his cheeks. Would he like peace with him? Not like he'd ever get him, of course. He was so staunchly loyal to Novaria, he doubted he'd have a chance no matter how much he tried to hang out with him. Never mind the fact that he still hadn't quite figured out if Fatemore was just simply too polite or scared to say no to his request of meeting up. Sure, he'd never really seen fear flash up in Fatemore's eyes around him, but who knows? Since he hung out with Novaria so much, who clearly mistreated him, he might have become very adept at hiding his emotions. He growled under his breath, and the spine on his tail rattled threateningly at the thought of Novaria. Now that was a face that deserved to be clawed off. He would take a sweet time with him if he ever could. Technically, he would have the chance during the next war, but he would never put himself against the side that Fatemore was on. Not that he was interested in allying with the Yosva and all that scum anyway. He wasn't sure what he would do, really. Without Jano sort of biting him to Novaria's alliance, he really didn't have any responsibilities one way or the other. I don't even know what I want to do, he thought, resting his chin on his knees. Is there anything out there for me? Should I be trying new things or something? I don't know. Maybe I could ask Fatemore. Maybe he can try and show me something new. No one except me is making being a murderer their whole life, so surely there has to be something else out there, right? What are you doing to him? A soft, shaking voice suddenly called through the now only light rain, startling CRB out of his thoughts. What? To Laszlo. He blinked a few times and looked down at the body beside him. The voice that had called was just as coarse, but he thought it to perhaps be a woman's. He wasn't sure if any of Jano's citizens had ever spoken to him, beyond begging for their lives or foolishly trying to intimidate him. All of them had treated him more or less like a brainless animal, actually, which, now that he thought about it, wasn't so different from how Jano himself had treated him either. Nothing? He hesitantly called back, his voice obviously laced with confusion. He paused. What did he plan to do with him? He pulled him out of the rain for some reason, but it only now hit him that he didn't know what he planned to do with him after. The rain would have just taken care of his funeral, more or less. Then why did you take him with you? The shaking voice mirrored his thoughts. I don't know, CRB answered honestly, shrugging a bit and turning his head towards the voice. It came from very close by. He suspected that it might even be from a window right beside the shelter. Do you want him? There was a brief pause of silence before the woman spoke again. Yes, if you would, if you don't have anything planned, What are you planning to do? He asked out of plain curiosity. Again, it took a while before a response came, the rain slowly fizzling out. I'd like to, bury him, instead of letting him rot in the streets like a lot of people do. CRB lowered his head slightly, his eyes wandering over the emaciated body of the man. Do you know him? His tone sounded more solemn than he meant to. There was silence once more, and CRB clenched his jaw. He could only imagine that whoever he was talking to was either scared off by him asking for details, or was simply stunned that he had expressed any sort of emotion besides just being feral. Are you going to tell him? Finally the woman asked, her voice quaking even more than it had been. CRB scoffed. No, I don't think I'll be telling Jano anything ever again, thank you. His voice turned slightly bitter. We're done. His heart ached the slightest bit at that decision, but he knew deep down that he'd stopped loving him months ago, maybe even a couple of years. Yes, I did know him. We were close, She broke off into a horrible coughing fit, breathing heavily before she could continue. We thought about living together, but then all this trouble started, with these awful drugs and his stupid gambling. I told him to quit. I knew he would get himself killed. He said he was in trouble and that he had to get away. I offered him to come here early, that there was an abandoned house that he could hide out in, but that clearly didn't help. Her voice faded out in the end, and CRB could hear faint sniffles instead. Sorry, I don't know why I'm telling you this. Not like you care or anything, I just thank you for killing him quickly and saving his body, if that's what you were doing. CRB blinked slowly. His entire body suddenly seemed so heavy, as if his limbs had turned into lead. He didn't quite know how to describe this feeling that rose within him and spread everywhere, but he knew he didn't like it. It wasn't quite that he cared deeply, but he still felt off. Her apologies, and even more so her thank yous, were sinking into his skin like 1,000 needles. It only dawned on him now that he'd barely realized that any of these people he killed had anyone. He hadn't thought anyone would care or grieve, and yet whoever this person was did. All the people here did. Writhing in pain day in and day out, always on death's door. CRB slowly got up, even though his legs didn't seem to be willing to support his weight, and he walked to the edge of the shelter, looking around its corner. His eyes immediately locked with the woman's. She looked just as pale as Laszlo had, though not quite as skinny. Her eyes weren't sunken into her skull as severely either, and they gleamed with tears. She wore a hat, though it was obvious that she was bald underneath. Some boils were on her face as well, along with a few scars. As soon as she saw his face, she yelped and pulled back into the window, slamming it shut. Fair, CRB thought, but it only made his limbs heavier. If everyone already thought he was going to kill them, and that he was nothing more than an inhuman beast, what point was there to change? And yet that familiar train of thought didn't quite sit right with him anymore. After a second of hesitation, he got out of the shelter completely and stood in front of the window, quickly making all his creature parts disappear. Hey, he called. It's okay, I won't hurt you, I promise. There was no response, and after a while, CRB thought about just turning away and leaving, letting her fetch Laszlo's bodies later once he was gone. But then, very slowly, her face crept back up into view. The window was still closed, and she simply stared at him in fear. He didn't move. He didn't smile either, as he was sure it would look more psychotic than he intended, and it would not help his case at all. CRB suddenly wondered if she'd heard him talk to the dead man, and if that's what inspired her now to slowly scoot the window back open. He couldn't help but think in mild amusement that flimsy thing wouldn't stop him from killing her if he actually wanted to anyway. Cautiously, she opened it as far as it happened before, while still intently staring at him, as if he was about to lunge at her face at any second. Her eyes wandered down to his mouth, and he could visibly see her pale further. He realized that he hadn't wiped Laszlo's dried blood off him. He looked sicker when she spotted his completely blood-soiled pant leg. Oh, that's mine, don't worry. He quickly and awkwardly rambled, half muffled as he tried to wipe his mouth. He barely bled on me, really. It wasn't, yeah, sorry. He stabbed me, so that's, all that is. It was clear that she'd scanned him for wounds, but the one on his neck had already healed over. I recovered quickly, he blurted, and then pointed at the knife that was now mostly submerged in a puddle. Her expression wavered as if she wasn't quite sure if she believed him, but to his relief, she didn't close the window again. I don't know, he mumbled, awkwardly moving his arms. Did he want to say sorry? He didn't feel particularly sorry for killing him, even now. He felt some kind of bad, but not really for him. Well, except for the situation of his birth and life, maybe. He didn't like that. I never expected to, talk to you, she said sheepishly. CRB huffed softly. I bet you, or anyone here, didn't even know I could. Well, what? No, it's not that. Just, It's alright, CRB shrugged. I don't blame you. Not like I gave any other impression, really. Relief flashed on her face, and it made some of the pure horror in her tense expression ebb away. He even swore to see a curious spark in her eyes, though he didn't dare to keep eye contact for too long. Do you, what's your name? Oh, you wouldn't know, huh? It's CRB, or, Yiji. He chuckled faintly as she blinked in surprise. Didn't expect me to have a human name, Well, we don't really... I mean, all we hear is... Anyway, I'm Huiying. Nice name, he commented, earning himself another surprised flicker. Yeah, sorry about, you know. He kicked a little rock with his boot. Huiying sighed deeply. Yeah, well, I suppose he knew what he was getting into. Not like he didn't have any examples of people who went the same path as he did. Pretty cynical. You are, Not taking part in this whole drug business then? She shifted in mild discomfort. Not as much as some, anyway. We kind of need some of them to survive here at this point. Not all the drugs here are for parties or whatever goes on in the Golden Cities. A lot of them just keep us alive, you know? Without them, this city would have long been completely deserted. Just as she'd finished, she keeled over and coughed, her whole body quivering horribly. Some blood splattered out of her mouth and onto the windowsill. Sorry. It only occurred to him now that she wasn't wearing a gas mask or any protective equipment for that matter. Shouldn't you be, wearing something? What, you mean a mask? She asked, seemingly puzzled about him caring, but clearly too glad to be talking to someone to pause for longer. Instead, she even barked a rough, faint laugh that made her cough again, though shorter this time. I guess I should be. Don't got the money for it, though. Rarely anyone does this far on the outskirts. All the money we do have gets spent on drugs to keep us alive. No one really eats anymore either. I only do because I managed to keep some plants healthy enough somehow. A small kindle of respect grew inside him. The people here still wanted to live, even with everything they had to go through. With a small twinge of shame, he glanced back at the shelter, remembering how earlier he thought that killing all of them was a mercy. Would you leave if you could? CRB asked, and quickly hurried on when she looked at him with a new flare of suspicion and fear. I mean to another city, or country, or something like that. Oh, of course I would. I moved to one of the Golden Cities in a heartbeat. I'd even leave this godforsaken place behind if I could go anywhere else, but I can't. No one can. Us on the outskirts will die on the outskirts, or in the lost zone once it expands to us. He looked up at her with alarm and echoed, Once it expands? Oh yeah, it's been doing that for a long while. Already ate up, I think, 5 more cities? Yeah, when I was really young, people here had it bad, but not this bad. Back then, the rain wasn't acid-packed with pure radiation poisoning either. CRB blanched, and Hui Ying winked with her forehead. I didn't think you'd care, especially not that much. He didn't tell me, he hissed and turned away slightly. No worse, he lied to me about it. He said it was fine, that he had it under control, that I was worrying and asking him about it for nothing. That's why he usually kept me away from here. But now I guess it doesn't matter. CRB paced back and forth. What else hadn't Jano told him? He thought they trusted each other enough for at least some transparency. That was a pretty significant thing not to tell him. How quickly has this been happening? CRB paused and looked up at her face, which was caught halfway between caution and confusion. I'm not sure. It's been getting faster, though. It's spread over 2 more towns just this year alone. I'm pretty sure this one will be gone by the end of the year. She attempted to sound nonchalant about it, but the quiver in her voice was unmistakable. He's dying, he realized quietly. Faster than I thought. Everything here is. Yep, all come to life inside of Jano, she said, wry and despondent. CRB rubbed his face and glanced away. There was nothing he could do. He already tried to do everything he could, and Jano wouldn't let up. The fact he'd lied to him only further cemented the fact that he didn't want help. He was perfectly content with letting the land and its people die, apparently. What would all this money be worth to him once he was dead? You know, Hui Ying began softly, I never imagined that when I'd meet you, I'd see someone so human. I certainly never expected to be talking to you, or to see you be worried. I guess you wouldn't have if you met me in another way, CRB mumbled, glancing back at the shelter again while Laszlo's dead body still rested. I'm glad I didn't. Not just, for survival, but, your pleasant company, especially in a place like this where barely anyone talks to another anymore. Pleasant company? He looked up at her and noticed that there was barely any fear left in her eyes. A sort of warmth began to prickle out of his chest and through his muscles. Her gaze was friendly, and that felt good. Oh, thanks, I guess, he shrugged. You're not bad company either, but aren't you, still mad about me, Hui Ying sighed again. If you hadn't done it, then someone else would have, I suppose, and at least you made it quick and painless. He didn't even scream. I knew he wouldn't make it deep down, I just hoped he would. No one makes it here, Right. They were quiet for a moment as CRB looked back at the shelter. She wanted to bury him. Did she have a shovel, or a car, or literally any means to transport him? She didn't seem like she could carry much of anything beyond her own body weight. Do you need help with burying him? He asked very slowly. You mean your help? CRB nodded. I'm a decent digger, and I'm really strong. I have no problem carrying him to a nice place, if you have one of those around here. She is still scared of me, at least scared enough to not want to be out here with me. I guess I can't blame her, he thought, but his stomach still twisted. Perhaps she'd noticed his expression, or simply made up her mind, because she quickly added, Yes, okay, I'll be out in a moment. CRB's eyes lit up slightly, and he nodded as she left the window. He himself turned around and walked back to the shelter, only now realizing that they'd been having an audience. A bunch of equally pale and sickly faces had been looking out from the windows, and to CRB's surprise, not quite every one of them disappeared as soon as his eyes landed on them. He looked down at Laszlo for a moment, and then carefully picked him up properly instead of just dragging him again. He was staggeringly light, as he was barely more than skin and bones. His cold body had begun to grow stiff. Once he'd stepped back out into the street with him, his eyes immediately caught onto the only other person outside. It was Hui Ying, her facial features set with tension. Her clothes were more akin to rags, patches of unrelated dull fabrics hastily sewn together and stained all over. CRB could see more faces than ever, looking down at them as if they were waiting to see what he was about to do. He figured most of them expected that they were going to see someone else die today. He slightly lowered his head and walked towards her, stopping again a small distance away. Her eyes detached themselves from his to wander over the man in his arms, and there was a new wave of sadness that washed over her. Cautiously, she took a step closer, and when CRB didn't react, she walked up to him and carefully took one of Laszlo's hands into hers. Her eyes still flickered up to him nervously, though. Where would you like for him to be buried? He asked, trying to sound as non-threatening as he could, hoping it didn't make him seem insane. I'm not picky. Just out of town should be fine, she responded, squeezing his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, leaned in closer so she could kiss it too. CRB let her lead the way, following close behind, and the longer they walked, the more he could watch her shoulders relax. He glimpsed at the peaceful expression of the man in his arms and the deep bite mark on his neck. I'm really glad I didn't torture him now. It didn't take long for them to leave the town behind, and with it the curious stares of the ones who still lived there. Soon she stopped. This is as good a place as any, I guess. CRB wrinkled his nose. It was just a dead field, but there wasn't much else around. Another town in the distance, a few knobbly twisted trees, a dead forest. She was right. It wouldn't get any better. He carefully placed the body in his arms down, and then got on all fours to dig a small way away to give Huiying a chance to grieve by his side for a while. Both him and her were rattled with coughing fits every now and again, and CRB could feel the acidic rain that had soaked into the earth slowly eat at the skin of his hands. He'd been through worse, though. Once it was finished, he looked back at her and noticed that she'd been watching him with an unreadable but soft expression. I think this should be enough, he huffed, pulling himself up, his hands shimmering with a thin layer of blood. Doesn't that hurt? She asked. Huh? Oh, this. He raised one of his hands. It's fine. It'll heal soon anyway. It's already starting to do that, so it doesn't really matter. CRB walked over to her and lifted Laszlo's body back up, carrying it over to the hole he'd made and lowering him into it, feeling Huiying join him closer than he expected. When he stood up again, she was only a few centimeters away. Tears shimmered in the corners of her eyes. Thank you, still, she mumbled. You didn't have to do any of this. I guess I didn't. They stood beside each other for a long time, the silence only interrupted by sniffling or either of them breaking out into coughs. Only when the clouded sky above began to turn dark did CRB silently push the arid earth back into the hole until it was entirely filled up, and Laszlo's body was safely underground. I wish we had flowers, Huiying said softly once he was done, shifting a tiny bit closer. I remember those from when I was a child. That seems so long ago now. CRB numbly looked down at the pile of disturbed earth. He didn't think he'd ever buried anyone he'd killed, or gave them any funeral, really. The air was so heavy, and not just because of the pollution that clung to it. He could feel it resting on his shoulders. This man might have been Huiying Samo. Unlike those he'd killed during active combat in the war, this wasn't a killing he could justify. None of the killings he'd done for Jano, really. He wondered if any of them ever did anything other than try and escape or have some debt, or if he'd really just been killing victims of Jano's corrupt regime. His stomach churned with sickness. He didn't think he'd wanted to kill innocents back then, had he? While Samuel was still alive. Killing had been fun then too, sure, but first and foremost it had been a means to an end. What end did his recent killing serve? None someone who wanted to stand for freedom should want to meet, he suspected. I'm sorry, he said in a strangled way. Not just for him, I mean just for everyone. You won't do it anymore, will you? She asked, though her voice wasn't hopeful or expectant. It seemed like she was asking for his sake more than her own. No, I won't, Serby mumbled, hanging his head a little, the darkness of the night settling over them properly. Something brushed against his arm, and he looked over to see that Huiying had faintly grazed hers against his. I'll remember this. I will too. More time passed silently between them as his thoughts kept running on. At first just about what he'd done, but then about what he'd do now too. Maybe he could try and talk to Fate more, or make some other friends. Anything to keep his mind off Jano and violence. But then his thoughts wandered back to Huiying too, and about what she'd do. If she was right and the zone would consume her town by the end of the year, she was practically standing at death's door. Do you want to come with me? CRB asked without thinking. To my country, I mean. Huh? Oh, of course you're a country. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I was thinking before. She laughed awkwardly, but then became serious. Come with you? I don't think I can. You know no one can leave here, I told you. CRB shrugged. I leave all the time. I've got a private jet, and I'm sure Jano just wants me out of his country at this point, so... Huiying looked at him from the side and then back to the grave. He knew what she must be thinking, if she felt at all similar to how he'd felt about Samo. How could I just leave him here? I don't know. I don't know if it would even do me any good. I've lived here too long to still have a long life, she mumbled, but then turned to look at the dark horizon where the thick clouds and dead earth nearly seemed to merge. But waiting here for the zone to consume me? She shivered, her eyes drifting away for just a moment as if she was remembering something terrible. Once she snapped out of it, she added in a faint whisper, Do you actually think I could leave? Sure. People don't often argue with me, as you can imagine, he huffed, and she chuckled faintly. I suppose. Huiying eyed the grave again, and then looked back at her town, which was just as dark as the field. No one had lit up any lights, and the street lamps didn't seem to have any electricity left either. Is life in your country good? I try to make it the best I can, CRB replied honestly. This might come as a shock, but I actually very much care about my people. She huffed. Not more shocking than anything else you've done today. Another moment of silence passed, and then she finally took a deep breath, which was nearly undercut by a cough. All right, yes, I would like to leave. I'm sure he would want me to as well. CRB smiled faintly, though instead of happiness there was a soul of melancholy. So many other people here suffered, but he couldn't simply take them all with him. Jano wouldn't let it happen, he was sure. Any aid he could attempt to send would be rejected. There was nothing more he could do. He called one of his people who had been waiting for him in another one of Jano's cities to come by and pick him up while they were walking back into town. Huiying had begun to shiver, and so he walked back to the abandoned house, picked up his jacket and hung it over her shoulders, watching her pull the thick fabric close to her and snuggling her face into the furry crest. Saving one person wasn't nearly enough to make up for everything he'd done against those who he'd helped oppress this entire time, but it was better than nothing. Perhaps he could find another way to help more of them. But for now, if he could take just one person out of here and give them a chance to breathe clean air for the first time, it would prove that he could do more than just kill. He could help people survive, too.